Greetings, highly respected video game critic M1 here, or as I'm known on NeoGaf, Lay Dark Samurai 99. Look, I'm never gonna do anything like this again, okay? I'm sorry. It's a joke!
Sal, please, it's a fucking joke!
Today, I want to drive a little engagement, a little interaction, so let's do this. I want you to guess what game I'm talking about here, what game I'm describing. In this game, you play as a man with psychopathic tendencies, taking on assassination jobs from a mysterious source. This is complemented by a romanticized 1980s inspired setting, complete with psychedelic visuals and a synthwave soundtrack that players agree is banging. This is a game in which you fight lots of enemies that all die in one hit, but so do you. You can get right back into the action immediately with the press of a button, quickly trying again and again until you perfect each room. While having fast-paced action gameplay, the game has come to be equally known for its compelling story, and it's quite accessible due to its playthrough length of only about 5 hours. Developed by a small team, many think of it as indie, though it's actually published by Devolver Digital. What game am I talking about? Why? Okay, you get the joke. Released in 2013, Denton Games' Hotline Miami was something of a watershed game. Itself heavily inspired by the film Drive, Hotline would go on to influence such classics as Bloodbath Kafkas and the Splatoon 2 Octo expansion. The latest such game is Katana Zero. I'm happy to say that the similarities to Hotline Miami are more than just skin deep. I think it uses those traits to good effect and ultimately forges its own identity. You can use that list I gave earlier of their similarities as kind of gist of what Katana Zero is all about, but this video is primarily for people who've already played it. I mean, this is going to be spoiler city. Okay? Katana Zero's first level is a great introduction to what the game is all about. I mean, the very first thing you do is kill a guy by reflecting his bullet with your sword. From this moment on, there's not a lot of hand-holding throughout the game. This level teaches a few extra things, but it doesn't slow the action down to do it. And that's great because non-stop, fast-paced action is the main appeal of the gameplay. Once you've had the chance to die and retry rooms a few times, you pretty much know what you're doing. Enter a room, die a bit, rewind each time to try again until you get it right. Since each rewind only takes you back to the beginning of the current screen, it doesn't take too long to get right back into the action. There are plenty of games that handle failure like this mechanically similarly to Katana Zero. This is just the latest in a long list of games in which you're expected to die a lot but can get right back into the action usually in under 10 seconds. I Want to Be the Guy, Wings of V, and, you know, Hotline Miami. Katana stands out due to the way it contextualizes failure in its story. The psychiatrist is shown giving the player Kronos pretty early on, right after the first mission. I like that it doesn't outright tell you at this point what the drug is. That's not just because I think the plot point of Zero being kept in the dark is a good one, but also because the player can figure it out along with him. It's good that we're trusted to think for ourselves a little, even if it's not played as some big twist. Anyway, Kronos allowing Zero to predict the future is a brilliant way of doing it. What might normally be a game over or you died is now, that won't work. What's wild to me about this is that technically almost nothing you see during the gameplay portions are actually happening, not even the successful attempts. That's just Zero coming up with a winning strategy. The security footage you see after is what really happens. This whole setup is a really cool take on how games like Katana Zero punish failure. Dying is failing mechanically, but narratively it isn't, because you don't really die. This actually leads me to what was originally going to be a major complaint, but since the recent update added hard mode, is now just a point of discussion. On my first playthrough, I found the game too easy. Out of the previous games I compared Katana to, Hotline Miami is the easiest, and to me, Katana Zero is significantly easier than that. When I said as much in one of my recent streams, someone was surprised by that. He said he'd found the game pretty hard. It could be that I'm just way better than him, but I'm guessing it's just a matter of different points of view. Deaths in these games are, strictly speaking, failure states, but failing means something massively different than in, say, various games with hardcore modes which delete your save file when you die. So let me make it clear, I died a lot in my first playthrough. I think I died more in my 4-hour playthrough of Katana Zero than I did in my recent 40-hour playthrough of Sekiro. But it's not the same. When you die in Sekiro, you lose a bunch of money and experience, and you have to sit through a loading screen and then run back to wherever you were. Sekiro is the most convenient game FromSoft has made in a long time when it comes to punishing death, and yet compared to it, Katana Zero's deaths feel like nothing. What it comes down to for me is this. I never got stuck anywhere. The room that took me the longest to beat was this minecart part. I don't know what I was doing, but anyway, it took me a little under 5 minutes. Not a big deal. No matter how many times I may have died to a specific challenge, I can't really say it was difficult if I ended up getting past it in no time. And to me, that's potentially a big problem. If not for hard mode being added, I feel Katana Zero would squander its thematic potential by not making the game more difficult. If I'd gotten stuck, it would feel all the better to see these VHS recordings of my triumphant, successful attempts. Since I never did though, I just skipped the majority of them on my first playthrough. On top of that, the added difficulty of hard mode adds a lot more impact to the kinds of situations Zero finds himself in, but I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. First, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the combat. Although Katana Zero looks like it's about zooming around and cutting people down at breakneck speed, there's a sense of precision in the combat. The slow-mo ability is an obvious example. Zero's vulnerability combined with clever enemy placement should sometimes be enough to get players to pause for a second and think about what they're going to do next, and slow-mo can help big time with the execution. The game has fairly weighty movement, as starting to dash will sort of make you go forward a set distance even if you let go immediately, making it difficult, in a good way, to quickly change position minutely. The dodge rolls are like this too. Combined with the wall jumping, quick falling, and sword swing momentum, the movement in Katana Zero feels sick. In my estimation, it's the primary source of combat depth on the player's end, and so much of it has to do with the fact that controlling yourself at speed isn't easy. Due to all this, you have to have a sort of precision and moment-to-moment calculation of your actions, even if you are going fast. Putting it that way, I'm sure you can see how that setup is elevated by the high difficulty of hard mode. It makes more of an impact that this samurai otaku in a bathrobe made it through a hopeless situation. I love this girl. She's right out of Momodora. One of the more common complaints I've seen is the tons of dialogue options having pretty much no effect on the course of the story, but this lady is a perfect example of the value the options hold. Oh no! Ah! There are several moments where Zero can only say the same thing, worded slightly differently. That's not great, but there are lots of cases in which Zero can get different responses from NPCs based on what he chooses. These do a good bit to flesh them out, along with Zero himself. The game's dialogue in general adds a lot to this. Katana makes heavy use of fun visual effects on its text. It might seem like a gimmick, but with a lot of lines I can practically hear the character's inflection as I read. The excellent pixel graphics help bring the characters to life too. I remember a time when indie games using pixel graphics was seen as some kind of excuse, or like a concession made for lack of resources. I think we're well past that point, and Katana Zero is a great example of that. V's animations are so good, he's so much fun. If I'm mentioning V, I have to mention the thick layer of 80s nostalgia. While 1980s settings or references are often out of place and pandering, in Katana Zero's case I find it works because it's central to some of the game's big themes. There's a perceived culture of excess that characterized the 80s, at least in the US.
This is crack.
rock cocaine.
It is so intense. I can't even describe it. It's the best. It really is.
People went crazy for it.
In Dade County alone, fatal drug overdoses have increased more than 88% in just the last 12 months.
It's the most addictive kind of cocaine.
Drugs were everywhere. Everybody started using cocaine. I mean, I remember in the 80s, it was like,
man, cocaine was the end thing back then. It was a she thing to do.
Everybody wants to be cool.
Drugs, sex, and violence. Sounds great, am I right? And it's the perfect setting for the excess of Katana Zero. Like in most games, mass murder in Katana Zero is a lot of fun. This is pretty much acknowledged by the unlockable prism sword. Making postmodern art with the blood of your enemies is almost as much fun as partying with V. Katana also sometimes creates a lighthearted atmosphere with a variety of surprising, epic gamer moments. The exploding scientist escort mission, going clubbing, bantering V into submission, don't flinch, pet cat. Serving as a buffer to all this excitement is the little girl. She initially seems to be part of the game's more lighthearted side. She's adorable and hilarious. But she's really just there to make the game more depressing. Realizing that such a nice kid is likely being abused and is getting pulled into a serial killer's life adds gravity to the whole story. I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the scenes with her takes place immediately after the player has a chance to murder a homeless guy. Making her someone players will want to protect is ultimately a setup for the story's darker side. It's hard to see the little girl as an example of how cute and fun the game can be after seeing her impaled on the wall. My favorite character, though, is the psychiatrist. In a game featuring the badass dragon, the hilarious V, and the embodiment of adorableness that is the little girl, picking the Shrink as my favorite character probably makes me sound like a contrarian. But just like in The Sopranos, the therapy sessions are not only interesting in their own right, but do a lot to elevate almost everything else.
And a big ass. Oh, look, we don't got time for this shit.
Well, it's interesting that you would say a big ass, because Gene is quite slender.
The main purpose for the meetups are to discreetly give Zero his dossiers, and of course, his chronos. Sure, there's a reason he also acts as a therapist. It's a convenient way to give some more characterization to the protagonist. What's really important, though, is when he gets pissed off. Oh, and one last thing, are you aware that the media has taken to calling you the Dragon? Do you know what the media should be calling you? Fucking nothing! Some titles have attempted to question the brutal violence that characterize so many video games, and so does Katana. But while these games tend to do so in a way that focuses on the moral aspect, Katana is a bit more practical about it. When you slaughter dozens of people in a single mission, nobody gets on Zero's case about being a bad person. Hell, at one point, a psychiatrist says that Zero's psychopathy is an asset. But when missions don't go the way he wants, which is almost always, he will let you know about it. This more matter-of-fact approach avoids retreading the point of killing is bad, but still gives significance to all the killing you do. Even if the story and setting is a bit over the top, there is more weight to the story's events, knowing that someone's gonna find all these dead bodies lying around. While some details can change, there's ultimately no way to avoid pissing off the Shrink, and there's no way to avoid killing him. Just like with the dialogue, you can do things somewhat differently to get somewhat different responses, but the plot is gonna go where it's gonna go. Zero and the player should share a sense of frustration as the Shrink tells them they should have done this or that mission better when they literally can't. And that's the point. Zero is a pawn, kept in the dark and dependent on his handler. He doesn't have much of a chance to direct a situation that's bigger than himself. Katana Zero tells the story of a man hooked on a drug that gives him the power of a god. To quote the Shrink, a drug that makes all others look like a joke, both in terms of the strength of its intended effect and the strength of its withdrawal. Even setting that withdrawal aside though, the potential for psychological issues should be obvious. Being able to see into the future and predict your own death so accurately that it feels real, feels like you're living it out and then rewinding time, would make it hard for anyone to keep track of reality. Some of the aforementioned gamer moments are about the effects of Chronos. The preview of the mansion level, the gambling minigame, These should all give some idea of just how unstable a Chronos user's entire life can become. To really drive it home, let me repeat what I said earlier. None of the gameplay portions are actually happening, they're just the precognition. To take that to its logical extreme, let me ask this. How do we know that any part of Katana Zero is actually happening in the present? If you want to be really extreme about it, you could even say that the level select menu, contextualized as Zero watching tapes of his exploits, could just be the last few moments of his life as he's dying and the Chronos is running out. Whether or not that's actually the case is irrelevant. The point is, Katana Zero takes the concept of dying and retrying again and again, immersing yourself in a challenging game and perfecting your execution, and gives it narrative form. The result is a game that's equal parts fun and sad. Bittersweet, I guess is the word. Anyway, it's a great game. It's a little derivative, and honestly, it doesn't even try to hide that. Celebrates it in some cases, but it's a game that's way more than the sum of its parts. I like it a lot. It's made a big impact on me for such a short little game. Out of 10.